In the grand tapestry of Greek mythology, no figure embodies both fascination and terror quite like Medea. She is not simply a sorceress, who appears briefly in the margins of epic tales. She is a central force, a woman whose choices altered the fate of heroes, kingdoms, and even the gods' designs. For centuries, audiences have recoiled from her actions, yet found themselves unable to look away, caught in the paradox of her character, at once a loving wife and a merciless avenger, a devoted mother and a destroyer of her own bloodline. It is this tension, this contradiction, that has secured Medea's place as the most dangerous woman in Greek myth. When most people think of Greek heroes, they remember the shining names: Achilles, Odysseus, Hercules, Jason. But what often goes unnoticed is how these men's destinies depended on women who were written into their stories as helpers, wives, or betrayers. Medea shatters this pattern. She is no passive background character. Without her, Jason would never have claimed the Golden Fleece. Without her, the legend of the Argonauts would have crumbled. Yet the very devotion that made her his salvation also became his downfall. In Medea's story, love and destruction are not opposites. They are fused into one tragic current. The Greeks feared her not only because of what she did, but because of what she represented. Medea was foreign, a daughter of Colchis, a land considered mysterious and barbaric at the edges of the known world. She was a priestess of Hecate, keeper of arcane knowledge, wielder of potions and spells. To the Greek mind, she was a living embodiment of everything uncontrollable: female autonomy, foreign power, and forbidden sorcery. And yet Euripides and the poets gave her a voice so powerful that it echoes through millennia, making us ask whether she is truly a monster or a mirror held up to our darkest fears. As we journey through Medea's myth, we will uncover not just the shocking acts that made her infamous, but the deeper meaning beneath them. We will explore how her story speaks to the psychology of betrayal, the terror of vengeance, and the struggle between love and pride. We will draw parallels with biblical warnings about unchecked ambition and the destructive allure of forbidden power. And most of all, we will see why her shadow still lingers, not only in myth, but in every cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession, manipulation, and rage. Medea is not just a mythic sorceress. She is a warning, a symbol, a riddle that has never been fully solved. And today, we will expose the full story of why she remains the most dangerous woman in Greek mythology. Long before she was vilified as the ultimate villainess of Greek tragedy, Medea entered the mythic stage as a daughter of royalty, a priestess of uncanny power, and a woman whose fate was bound to one of the greatest quests in all mythology, the pursuit of the Golden Fleece. She was the daughter of King Aeetes of Colchis, a land at the farthest reaches of the known world. Colchis was imagined by the Greeks as a place of strangeness, mystery, and untamed magic, and Medea was its most dangerous treasure. As the granddaughter of Helios, the sun god, her very blood carried a divine spark, and through her mother's lineage, she inherited the craft of sorcery, becoming a priestess of Hecate, the goddess of the night, the crossroads, and witchcraft. From the very beginning, Medea was set apart, marked as someone whose power would shape the destiny of others. Her story becomes inseparable from Jason, the ambitious Greek hero who sought the Golden Fleece to reclaim his throne. When Jason arrived in Colchis with the Argonauts, it was not his strength or his cunning that secured his success, but Medea's intervention. Struck by love, or perhaps bound by divine compulsion from Hera and Aphrodite, Medea betrayed her own father to aid Jason. She provided him with potions to withstand the fire-breathing bulls, strategies to outwit the earth-born warriors, and the knowledge to overcome every obstacle Aeetes placed before him. Without Medea, Jason's tale would have ended in humiliation and death. With her, he emerged victorious, carrying the Golden Fleece and the hope of kingship. Yet the cost of this triumph was blood. Medea, in helping Jason escape, committed one of her first horrifying acts. She murdered her own brother Apsyrtus. In some versions of the myth, she lured him into a trap. In others, she dismembered him and scattered his body parts into the sea to delay her father's pursuit, forcing Aeetes to stop and collect his son's remains. Here, the pattern of Medea's life begins to emerge. Love, loyalty, and protection expressed through violence and betrayal. Her devotion to Jason was absolute, but it demanded a price that stained her soul forever. The lovers fled to Greece, but Medea's foreignness and sorcery made her an object of suspicion wherever she went. She rejuvenated Jason's father with magical potions, but when she tricked the daughters of Peleus, Jason's enemy, into killing their father under the guise of a similar ritual, she branded herself once again as a woman whose power was inseparable from bloodshed. Medea's myth is not a straight line of villainy. It is a labyrinth where acts of salvation and destruction intertwine. Each choice she made to protect or uplift Jason simultaneously cut her ties to her family, her homeland, and her humanity. What emerges from these early tales is a portrait of a woman who is both indispensable and dangerous. To the Greeks, Medea was unsettling, precisely because she was not easily categorized. Was she a savior or a murderer? A victim of divine manipulation or a willing conspirator in evil? These questions haunted the poets and playwrights who retold her story, and they continue to haunt us today. In Medea, we see the archetype of love that is willing to betray blood, devotion that corrupts into destruction, and intelligence that becomes feared when it flows through the hands of a woman. The myth of Medea is not merely a story of magic and betrayal. It is a window into the anxieties of an entire civilization. The Greeks saw in her a symbol of the foreign, the feminine, and the forbidden, a dangerous combination that could unravel even the mightiest of heroes. And as we move deeper into her story, we begin to see why her name became synonymous with fear, why her legend could not be silenced, and why Medea remains, even today, a figure whose myth is as captivating as it is terrifying. If Jason's myth reveals Medea as the indispensable key to heroic success, it is her sorcery that defines her legacy in the Greek imagination. Medea was not merely a woman in love. She was a woman who wielded knowledge and power that few men, and even fewer women, were permitted to hold. As a priestess of Hecate, she inherited the mysteries of herbs, potions, and incantations. She was the guardian of secrets hidden in the natural world, a living bridge between the mortal and the divine. In Greek culture, such knowledge was feared. Healing and destruction often came from the same hand, and those who could blur the line between medicine and poison stood outside the safe boundaries of society. Medea's sorcery placed her firmly in this unsettling space. The ancients associated her powers with liminality, the spaces in between. She was tied to crossroads, thresholds, and borders, the places where order gave way to chaos. In myth, her potions could make Jason invincible to fire, tame wild beasts, and rejuvenate the old. But they could also deceive, corrupt, and kill. This duality reflected the Greek ambivalence toward female power. Women were expected to nurture, to heal, to preserve the household. But when these same qualities turned outward, when knowledge and influence left the private sphere and entered the public, women were demonized as witches, seductresses, or destroyers. Medea became the embodiment of this archetype, the woman who could not be contained. The connection to Hecate is crucial here. Hecate herself was a goddess who existed at the margins, goddess of witchcraft, of night, of hidden knowledge. By aligning Medea with Hecate, the myths cast her as more than just a mortal woman. They gave her a divine authority that blurred the boundary between human and supernatural. To the Greeks, this was both awe-inspiring and deeply threatening. In a patriarchal world that feared the uncontrolled autonomy of women, Medea symbolized the nightmare of a woman who needed neither man nor state to wield power. This archetype of the sorceress is not unique to Greece. We see echoes of it in the biblical narratives. Jezebel, who used her influence and cunning to challenge prophets and kings. The warnings in Exodus and Leviticus against sorcery and witchcraft. The stories of women who, by knowledge or seduction, turned men away from covenant with God. In both traditions, feminine power untethered from male authority was portrayed as dangerous, destabilizing, even demonic. Medea thus belongs to a wider archetype of the forbidden woman, one who defies social boundaries and bends the laws of the divine to her will. But to reduce her to a mere villainess is to miss the complexity of her role. Medea represents not only the fear of destruction, but also the recognition that wisdom itself is double-edged. Her knowledge of herbs could heal or kill. Her loyalty could save or betray. Her voice could plead or curse. In her, we see the archetypal truth that power without restraint is terrifying, but power denied its rightful place is equally destructive. The Greeks may have called her dangerous, but they also could not imagine Jason's victory without her. This paradox is the heart of Medea's sorcery. She is both gift and curse, salvation and doom, healer and executioner. Medea's story, then, is not just about spells and poisons. It is about the ancient anxiety over where true power comes from, who is allowed to wield it, and what happens when the boundaries of gender, culture, and divinity are crossed. She stands as a reminder that the archetype of the sorceress has never been about magic alone. It has always been about the fear of a woman who cannot be controlled. If Medea's sorcery revealed her as a woman of uncanny power, it was betrayal and revenge that etched her name into history as a figure of unrelenting terror. The turning point in her story comes not during her triumph with Jason, but after. Once the Golden Fleece had been won, once they had fled Colchis and settled into their lives in Greece, the promises of love and loyalty began to unravel. Jason, the man for whom Medea had betrayed her father, slaughtered her brother, and abandoned her homeland, chose ambition over devotion. Seeking security and power, he cast Medea aside to marry Glaus, the daughter of King Creon of Corinth. For Jason, this was a political strategy. For Medea, it was the ultimate betrayal. She had burned every bridge behind her, sacrificed everything she had, and the man for whom she had paid this price discarded her as if she were nothing. In that betrayal, something snapped. Euripides' Medea presents us with a woman whose love curdles into vengeance, whose heartbreak hardens into calculation. And what follows is not the blind rage of a scorned lover, but the deliberate, chillingly precise actions of someone who knows exactly how to inflict pain. Medea first turned her fury toward Glaus. She sent a poisoned robe and crown as gifts, knowing that Jason's new bride would eagerly accept them. When Glaus put them on, the garments ignited with an inextinguishable fire, burning her alive in a horrific spectacle. Creon, rushing to save his daughter, was consumed by the same flames. In one calculated move, Medea destroyed not only Jason's new wife, but also his powerful father-in-law, leaving him stripped of both love and protection. Yet the most infamous act was still to come. For Euripides and later storytellers, Medea's ultimate revenge was the murder of her own children. This is the moment that has horrified audiences for more than 2 millennia. It is one thing to punish a rival, another to destroy a kingdom, but to kill your own flesh and blood? To many, this act sealed Medea as a monster beyond redemption. And yet, the chilling power of her story is that Medea's reasoning was not madness, but a terrible logic. She declared that Jason would not live to see his children taken by another woman, nor would she allow them to be mocked or harmed as the bastards of a foreign witch. To her, their deaths became a twisted assertion of control, a refusal to let Jason or society determine her children's fate. The horror of this act is not only in its brutality, but in its intimacy. Medea does not kill faceless enemies. She kills her own sons. Euripides forces his audience to watch as she debates, hesitates, weeps, and then commits the act anyway. In this, Medea becomes more than a villain. She becomes a terrifyingly human figure, one who exposes the depth of what love, betrayal, and pride can unleash when pushed beyond endurance. Her revenge is not random destruction. It is pointed, deliberate, and tragically personal. For the Greeks, this was both shocking and revealing. The myth of Medea exposed the fragility of trust, the destructive power of pride, and the reality that betrayal can unmake not only relationships, but entire worlds. Jason, the supposed hero, is left broken, stripped of everything he gained. Medea, though reviled, remains unpunished, carried away in a chariot given by her grandfather Helios. In a sense, the gods themselves vindicate her. The message is as unsettling as it is unforgettable. Sometimes, vengeance triumphs over justice, Psychologically, Medea's story forces us to confront the terrifying capacity of the human heart. What happens when devotion becomes obsession? What happens when betrayal festers unchecked? In Medea, we see a portrait of rage so consuming that it consumes even love itself. It is a lesson that betrayal does not simply wound, it transforms, reshaping grief into cruelty and loyalty into vengeance. Her story is a mirror to the darkest corners of human emotion, where the line between love and hate collapses into a single destructive force. This is why Medea still haunts us. She is not just the dangerous sorceress who aided Jason, but the betrayed woman whose revenge transcends time, culture, and morality. Her actions are unthinkable, yet her motivations are chillingly understandable. And it is precisely this combination, the horror of her deeds and the clarity of her logic, that makes Medea's story one of the most unforgettable tragedies in all of mythology. While Medea's myth had been told in fragments before, it was Euripides who gave her story its most enduring shape. His play, Medea, first performed in Athens in 431 BC, shocked audiences not only with its brutality, but with its daring portrayal of a woman who refused to conform to the cultural expectations of her time. In the Greek world, women were meant to remain silent, submissive, and confined to the household. Yet Euripides placed Medea at the center of the stage, giving her eloquence, agency, and an unflinching will. She speaks more lines than Jason. She dominates the action, and she articulates her pain with a clarity that forced Athenian audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about power, gender, and justice. In the play, Medea is not reduced to a one-dimensional villainess. She is articulate, rational, and even sympathetic at moments. Euripides allows the audience to hear her anguish, her reasoning, and her justification. She points to Jason's betrayal not only as a personal wound, but as a violation of covenant, trust, and honor. Her rage is terrifying precisely because it is rooted in real grievances that any human being might understand. By humanizing her, Euripides blurred the line between victim and monster, raising questions that still echo in literary and cultural debates. Is Medea to be condemned, pitied, or both? What made the tragedy especially disturbing was its inversion of traditional roles. In Greek culture, men were expected to act in public, women in private. Men were associated with rationality, women with emotion. Yet in Medea, these roles are reversed. Jason comes across as calculating, but shallow, concerned with ambition and reputation, while Medea wields the sharper intellect, the keener understanding of justice, and the stronger will to act. The horror of her choices is undeniable, but the audience cannot dismiss her as irrational. She embodies reason pushed to its darkest extreme, showing what happens when intellect and passion fuse in the pursuit of vengeance. The cultural impact of Medea was profound. She became a touchstone for exploring the dangers of unchecked passion, the fragility of marriage, and the destructive potential of betrayal. At the same time, she embodied the Greek fear of the other, the foreign woman, the outsider, the figure who destabilizes the order of the polis. By making Medea both central and terrifying, Euripides held up a mirror to the anxieties of his society, fears of women's autonomy, fears of foreign influence, fears of love's uncontrollable power. Over the centuries, Medea's figure continued to inspire retellings, adaptations, and debates. Roman poets like Ovid emphasized her sorcery and passion, while later European writers recast her as a symbol of dangerous female sexuality or an archetype of vengeance. In each era, Medea reflected the cultural anxieties of the time, whether about women's independence, the consequences of betrayal, or the destructive side of love. She was never static, never confined to a single interpretation. Instead, she remained a living archetype, a character who could not be easily dismissed or safely contained. In Greek tragedy and culture, Medea was more than a character. She was a cultural warning. She embodied what could happen when social bonds were broken, when promises were betrayed, and when the boundaries of gender and power were crossed. For audiences then and now, her story is unforgettable, precisely because it forces us to confront the destructive forces lurking within human relationships. Medea is not just a myth, she is a mirror, and what we see in her is often what we fear most in ourselves. To fully grasp why Medea has remained such a powerful and unsettling figure, we need to look beyond the Greek stage and examine how her archetype resonates with biblical narratives. For the Greeks, Medea was the sorceress who blurred the line between love and destruction. For the biblical writers, women who wielded such power were often framed as temptresses, corruptors, or destroyers who stood in opposition to God's covenant. When placed side by side, these traditions reveal a common cultural anxiety: the fear of female power when untethered from male authority and divine order. Consider Jezebel, Queen of Israel, who, like Medea, was foreign, powerful, and feared for her influence. Jezebel used her authority to manipulate, seduce, and silence prophets. She was accused of leading Israel into idolatry and sorcery, and her violent end, thrown from a window and consumed by dogs, was portrayed as divine judgment for her defiance. The parallels to Medea are striking. Both are foreign women who marry powerful men. Both are accused of corrupting those men and destabilizing kingdoms. And both embody the fear of women whose influence disrupts the established order. In Greek myth, Medea is carried away by her grandfather Helios's chariot, untouched by punishment. In the Bible, Jezebel is crushed by divine wrath. Yet in both, the message is clear. Such women are forces of chaos, and societies tremble at their presence. Another comparison lies with Delilah, who seduced Samson, the man consecrated to God. She lulled him into revealing the secret of his strength and delivered him to his enemies. Her weapon was not poison or fire, but intimacy, and through it, she toppled a hero. Medea and Delilah embody the same archetype, the dangerous woman, whose power lies in her ability to penetrate the heart of a man and use it against him. Samson, like Jason, falls not to brute strength, but to misplaced trust in a woman whose loyalty is divided. In both traditions, betrayal by love becomes the catalyst for ruin. We also find echoes in Herodias, who manipulated her daughter Salome to request the beheading of John the Baptist. Here again, a woman's ambition, vengeance, and cunning lead to bloodshed. These biblical stories, like Medea's myth, dramatize the consequences of unchecked pride, betrayal, and vengeance. They are not just about women. They are about human weakness, the destructive allure of power, and the cost of ignoring divine order. But while the Greeks framed Medea's sorcery as a cultural and psychological threat, the Bible frames such figures in explicitly theological terms. Sorcery is condemned as rebellion against God, a counterfeit of divine power. The book of Deuteronomy warns against those who practice divination, witchcraft, or consulting with spirits. In Revelation, sorcery is linked with Babylon, the great city of rebellion against God. Seen through this lens, Medea is not just a tragic figure, but a living symbol of spiritual corruption, the human desire to seize divine power without divine blessing. Her knowledge of herbs, potions, and incantations may seem like ancient magic, but at its heart, it represents the perennial temptation to control life, death, and destiny apart from God. This comparison does not flatten the myths and scriptures into the same story, but highlights how both cultures grappled with similar anxieties. The Greeks feared Medea as a disruption of social order. The Hebrews warned against figures like Jezebel and Delilah as threats to covenant faithfulness. Both reveal a deep unease with power, especially when wielded by those outside the structures of patriarchal control. And yet, there is something profoundly human about Medea's tale that the Bible also acknowledges in its warnings. Vengeance belongs to God, not to us. Medea's tragedy is not only in her sorcery or her foreignness, but in her choice to take justice into her own hands, to let betrayal metastasize into destruction. The Bible reminds us that bitterness, once rooted, produces death, not only of relationships, but of souls. Medea, Jezebel, Delilah, Herodias, all serve as archetypes, warnings of what happens when pride, vengeance, and ambition overwhelm love, humility, and trust. They are not simply villains to be dismissed. They are mirrors showing humanity's constant temptation to grasp power without wisdom, to answer betrayal with blood, and to exalt self over covenant. In exposing Medea through this biblical lens, we do not only uncover the dangers of one woman in myth, we uncover the universal truth that unchecked pride and vengeance can destroy everything, from households to kingdoms. If we step back from the details of Medea's myth, we begin to see why her story endured for centuries, far beyond the Athenian stage. Medea is not just a character. She is an archetype, a vessel into which societies poured their deepest anxieties and fears. At the heart of this archetype is the image of the outsider woman, a figure both desired and despised, both needed and feared. Medea was foreign, a woman of Colchis in a Greek world that mistrusted foreigners. She was powerful, a sorceress in a culture that sought to confine women to domestic silence. And she was unpredictable, capable of both saving and destroying in equal measure. For the Greeks, Medea became a living embodiment of the dangers that threatened social stability from within and without. The fear of Medea was not only the fear of sorcery or murder, but the fear of what happens when established boundaries collapse. She was wife and traitor, mother and child killer, healer and destroyer. In her contradictions, she represented the collapse of categories the Greeks relied upon to keep order in their world. In Medea, love was not safe, motherhood was not sacred, foreignness was not exotic, but terrifying. By embodying all of these reversals, Medea revealed the fragility of the cultural frameworks that held Greek society together. Her myth whispered the possibility that order was an illusion, that chaos always lurked beneath the surface, waiting for betrayal, passion, or pride to bring it forth. These fears are not unique to Greece. They reappear throughout history in the demonization of women accused of witchcraft, particularly in the Christian Middle Ages, and the witch hunts of early modern Europe. The archetype of the dangerous woman, the one who holds knowledge men cannot control, who refuses silence, who defies the boundaries of her culture, has been used again and again as a scapegoat for collective fears. In this way, Medea's story is not only about her, but about the societies that told it. The myth became a mirror, reflecting anxieties about marriage, gender, betrayal, and foreignness, while giving those anxieties a face to condemn. At the same time, Medea's enduring power comes from the fact that she cannot be easily dismissed. She is not a faceless villain to be vanquished. She is articulate, intelligent, and painfully human in her motivations. We understand her grief even as we recoil from her actions. This complexity makes her archetype so potent. She is not simply the embodiment of evil, but the embodiment of our recognition that love, pride, and rage can drive any human being to unthinkable extremes. In the biblical context, these collective fears echo in warnings against idolatry, sorcery, and rebellion. Just as Medea embodied the terror of power beyond control, the Bible's archetypal warnings pointed to the dangers of straying from covenant, of seeking power through forbidden means, of letting vengeance consume the heart. In both traditions, the dangerous woman becomes a symbol of what happens when boundaries are crossed, and when the order of God or society is defied. Medea, then, is not simply a Greek mythic figure, but a timeless archetype of collective fear. She reminds us that societies often demonize what they cannot control, projecting anxieties onto those who stand outside accepted roles. And yet, her story also forces us to look inward, to ask whether the seeds of betrayal, vengeance, and chaos lie not just in others, but in ourselves. As we close this journey into the myth of Medea, we return to the question that has haunted audiences for over 2,000 years. Was she a monster, or was she a mirror? The easy answer is to dismiss her as the embodiment of evil, a sorceress, a murderer, the woman who slaughtered her own children in cold blood. And yet, the enduring power of Medea's story lies in the fact that she is not so easily contained. Her voice in Euripides' play is not the shrill cry of madness, but the calm, cutting tone of someone who has been betrayed, humiliated, and stripped of everything, and who decides to seize back control in the only way she knows how. In that voice, we hear not only horror, but also recognition. The recognition that vengeance, once unleashed, does not remain distant. It lives in the human heart. Medea's story forces us to grapple with uncomfortable truths about human nature. Love is not safe. loyalty can be broken. And when trust is shattered, the consequences can be catastrophic. Jason believed that his betrayal of Medea was a simple political calculation, a step towards securing his future. He underestimated the depth of her devotion, the magnitude of her sacrifice, and the cost of her rage. In this, Medea is not merely a mythological figure. She is a timeless warning that relationships are not transactional, that betrayal is not without consequence, and that pride can blind even the most ambitious hero to the storm brewing in his own household. From a cultural perspective, Medea exposes the anxieties of Greek society, the fear of women who could not be controlled, the fear of foreigners who disrupted the order of the police, the fear of sorcery that blurred the line between healing and destruction. She became the archetype of chaos breaking into order, of passion overturning reason, of vengeance overturning justice. In condemning her, the Greeks were also confessing their own fragility, acknowledging how easily the bonds of marriage, loyalty, and family could unravel. Medea was their nightmare, but she was also their mirror. And when we look at her story through a biblical lens, her shadow becomes even darker. She stands alongside Jezebel, Delilah, and Herodias as figures who wielded influence with devastating effect. These women, like Medea, reveal how easily the human heart can be seduced by pride, vengeance, and the allure of forbidden power. The Bible warns us that vengeance belongs to God alone, that sorcery and rebellion are paths to destruction, that bitterness corrupts not only those it is directed against, but also the one who harbors it. Medea's tragedy is not only that she committed acts of horror, it is that she allowed betrayal to define her, vengeance to consume her, and pride to isolate her from every form of redemption. Yet we cannot deny her brilliance. Medea was articulate, strategic, and unyielding. She could see through Jason's shallow reasoning and expose it for the cowardice it was. She could command the stage, hold the attention of an audience, and force them to reckon with her pain. And perhaps this is the most terrifying truth of all. Evil does not always appear as madness or chaos. Sometimes it appears as logic, as eloquence, as determination so strong that it becomes unstoppable. Medea's story reminds us that the line between righteousness and destruction is thinner than we would like to believe. Why, then, does Medea remain the most dangerous woman in Greek mythology? It is not only because of her sorcery, her betrayal, or even her infanticide. It is because she reveals the truth that betrayal, once unleashed, creates a fire no one can control. It is because she shows us that vengeance, once chosen, spares no one, not even the innocent. And it is because she forces us to confront the darkness within ourselves, the part of the human heart that, when wounded deeply enough, might be capable of horrors we dare not imagine. Medea endures because she is not safely locked away in the past. She is present every time betrayal leads to bitterness, every time love curdles into rage, every time the pursuit of control costs us the very things we sought to protect. Her story does not comfort, it unsettles, and perhaps that is why it has never died. To expose Medea is to expose ourselves, to see that the most dangerous figures in myth are not those who are utterly foreign to us, but those who reflect what we fear most within our own hearts.